eggs and waste, but if I vacate the place, it'll be.
He don't have no social media tags or anything. He's not on IG, Facebook, none of that. He has none of that.
Right, yeah, but saying in that sense, though, just to cut a long story short, nobody came out with no music just for the smokers. Or
a tall, thin man with a mischievous grin, wild curly hair, and an energy that makes any room explode. That's Redman the Beast, who turned hip-hop into the craziest game of the 90s. He's not just a rapper, he's a symbol of freedom, the soul of wild, humorous rap style, and a legend that anyone who dares to step into hip-hop must respect. But behind that joyful madness lies a truth that few know. He was belittled and considered an incompetent person in the history of rap. Once he collapsed right on stage with a pale face, causing the crew to panic. Once I was grabbed by the neck by security and dragged out of a nightclub. And the times I overdosed because I abused drugs too much. Each impact pulled him deeper into a black hole that even those closest to him couldn't react to in time. What drove a reckless hip-hop legend into such a cruel series of tragedies? And how dark are the secrets behind it? Really stay, because the truth behind it will make you see Hollywood with completely different eyes. 1. The child was born on the battlefield. Reginald Redman Noble grew up in Newark, New Jersey, a place that sounds familiar on the hip-hop map, but for a child living there in the 80s, it wasn't a city. It's an open-air battlefield. Newark was so poor back then that poverty became the default backdrop. But what people remember about it isn't hunger, but the feeling that this place operated under its own set of rules. Chaos was order. 3-room apartments crammed with 3 generations, where the family's laughter was never loud enough to drown out the noise outside the door, where a single step out could turn into a confrontation. Redman once said, "Going out on the street is fighting." It sounds like hyperbole, but in Brick City, that's just how things are. What makes Newark a place not for the faint of heart isn't poverty, but the normalization of death. Here, murder is almost a trend, something no one wants. Yet it happens often enough to become a part of daily life. When outsiders mention New Jersey, they think of carjacking. But for the people in the area, carjacking was just the opening act. What truly makes everyone mature early are the white cloths lying on the sidewalk, so many that no one even looks back anymore. Imagine an 8-9-year-old boy watching the police clean up a dead body, then turning and going home, carrying his school bag as if nothing had happened. That was Redman's childhood. But the darkness surrounding him wasn't just from the streets. It flows down from the generations that came before. My father was one of many men from Newark who were drawn into the Vietnam War, returning with wounds that never had a chance to heal. His mother spent over 30 years working on affirmative action and fighting for the community, yet still had to raise her children in a house where every dinner was a struggle between hope and scarcity. Redman grew up between 2 extremes: a disabled father with war memories, a mother trying to save others from things she couldn't save for her own family, and right outside his door, friends always ready to lead him down the path of bloodshed. Over time, Redman realized what no one needed to spell out: going to prison is a kind of luck. If not, you'll be lying on this concrete floor. His brother and closest relatives were deeply involved in street life. 10 years in prison is as common as the changing of the seasons. But even standing next to the most serious people in Brick City, Redman still felt something didn't quite fit his nature. He went with them, but didn't belong to that world. Every time he saw his friends getting into fights, running away, or preparing for a new mission, what he felt wasn't adrenaline, but exhaustion. A kind of weariness felt by someone who understands that life just repeats the same cycle: hit, run, escape, and then start all over again. When a seasoned gangster tells him something like, "You'll have to turn around eventually," Redman only sees emptiness in it. If turning back is the solution, then why did they enter in the first place? He realized he was also at that crossroads, and it wasn't meant for him. 2. Painful turning point, a child's rock bottom. But only after getting caught up in a life-or-death robbery did he truly understand the words of the old gangster who knew more than anyone else. He was drawn into robbery schemes with his close friends, partly because he wanted to make money quickly, and partly because having grown up amidst gunfire going with his brothers to do business was almost normal in his eyes. But the price to pay is too terrible. Redman recounted that once, after participating in a case, everyone ran away when things started to go south, but he stubbornly stayed put just because of the ego of a young man who wanted to prove he was a monster. Just a few seconds later, he was trampled to the point of being unable to breathe and had to crawl under a parked car to avoid being crushed like a tin can. It was such a terrible moment that he felt worse than having a knife held to his throat. I swear to you, death at that moment was clearer 100 times more painful than the pain of being beaten, he said, recounting the experience. That incident became a scar in his memory. Something he himself admitted woke him up. As soon as things calmed down, Redman told himself, "This isn't for me." But life doesn't let go that easily. Just when it seemed he had escaped the vortex, another blow struck, this time from within his own home. He was sitting down for dinner trying to act as if nothing was wrong, wearing a hat he knew his mother hated, because she always made her children take their hats off when they sat at the table. Under that hat were the vials of cocaine he had hastily hidden. Mom told him to take off his hat. As soon as he lifted it, the coke stuck underneath immediately spilled out right in front of her. Not a single scream, not a single curse, not a moment's hesitation. His mother packed his things right there and kicked him out of the house. That wasn't the action of a mother trying to teach her child, but the reflex of a woman who was too exhausted after watching the child she raised in poverty fall into something more toxic than street violence. Redman once described his home with a half-laughing, half-bitter tone. The mice ran like soldiers, and the cockroaches multiplied to the point where a light touch on the toaster would cause them to spill out like water. But the thing he remembers most is the moment his mother was getting a box of cereal, and a cockroach jumped right into her face. At that moment, she just said one sentence, "That's enough." A woman who worked for the community for 30 or 40 years still has to live in those circumstances, still has to strain herself to protect her children from the very neighborhood she grew up in. That endurance etched itself into Redman in a way no scandal could compare to. That greatly inspired him about a mother determined to change and be responsible for her words. All of this makes up a part of Redman that the public sees the aura of someone who has hit rock bottom, but hasn't let the bottom swallow them. 3. The journey to music. During those days of running frantically through the streets, he became fond of rap music. He enjoyed gathering with others and liked the feeling of being noticed in the crowds on the street. He once said he'd been rapping since he was 16, but it wasn't until he accidentally played EPMD's Strictly Business that things truly clicked. Just a child in a tiny room, the speaker wires twisted like a bird's nest, and the music blaring making everything in his head flash bright. It's not the kind of, "this is a good song" kind of thing. It's the kind of, "this is something I'm strangely drawn to that I haven't learned yet, but I have a feeling I'll be connected to it for life." From that day on, Redman didn't just listen to music, he devoured it. And at 18, he took the stage name DJ Cut Killer, because he had nothing but a few vinyl records and the grit of someone who grew up among truly dangerous men. He brought his rickety turntable to the park to crowded house parties, freestyling over funk and hip-hop, as if it were the only thing he could control in a life that rarely listened to him. No classrooms, no teachers, just the instinct and stubbornness of someone who believes they can claw their way to a place in this world with their bare hands. Even the name Redman accurately reflects his life. No calculation, no PR, no strategy. It was just a freezing cold day, and a girl threw a snowball that hit him right in the jaw, making his whole face flush red, as if someone had just painted it. The friends burst out laughing, "Red," and that name remained. He likes its compact, powerful, slightly rebellious quality, so he added the word man. That's it. A stage name born from a random throw, much like his life's journey. A little painful, a little funny, and then becoming destiny before he even realized it. But all those things, the old vinyl records, the freestyle sessions, the new name, still only made him a neighborhood talent, until the day Eric Sermon from EPMD saw him. At the time, Redman was DJing for Lords of the Underground, and he didn't really think anyone was watching him. And yet, Eric Sermon immediately recognized what hip-hop fans would later call undiluted realness. He said that just by looking at Redman for a few seconds, he knew, this kid has something. And it didn't take much longer than that they talked for a day. And a few months later, Redman packed up his entire life, left Newark, and moved in with Sermon on Long Island, right into Sermon's apartment. It was the first time he had left the land that made him who he was. For the first time, he entered a place so quiet that he had to learn to sleep without hearing the arguments outside the alley. From the outside, it looked like a life-changing opportunity. But for Redman, it brought an unexpected silence. He found his music, but lost the feeling of belonging somewhere. Newark was too chaotic to keep him, and Long Island was too flat for him to believe he was truly safe. And that is the paradox of an artist who grew up in the shadows. Even when holding a golden opportunity in his hands, he still carries a lingering sadness that no one can see. Music gave him hope, but it was a bitter kind of hope. Because to move forward, he was forced to leave behind a part of the person who had saved him from the streets. 4. The moment of standing on stage. It wasn't the glorious moment people imagined. There were no golden lights shining down in a chosen star kind of way, no applause lifting him up as if by destiny. The moment Redman stepped onto the EPMD stage for the first time, it was like a child from Brick City being thrown straight into the spotlight, and in an instant, all the memories of the neighborhood where gunshots were more familiar than birdsong came flooding back. What he feels isn't confidence, it's fear. A very old, very deep fear. The feeling of being swallowed up right in front of hundreds of people. You used to say you still remembered the smell of smoke in the room, the heat radiating from the crowd, and the MC calling your name, as if summoning someone to step forward in front of the horseshoe. And right at that moment, Redman had only one thought in his head. If he failed this time, his life would end up like his friends in Newark, disappearing without a trace, with no one mentioning his name. And if I can do it, at least someone will know I existed. That tremor wasn't the tremor of a new artist. It's the kind of run of someone who had to crawl under a car to avoid being trampled to death after a botched robbery. The kind of run of someone who grew up with the sound of ambulance sirens every night and curses echoing through the windows. So when Eric Sermon handed him the mic, Redman didn't feel like he was being given an opportunity. I feel like I've been summoned. The stage became a courtroom. The crowd becomes the judge. And you, whether you like it or not, are still the newer kid being pushed into the public eye. He took a deep breath, then freestyle. It's not freestyle like trying out, but it's the legendary AZ screen. Each letter pops out like a knife, clean sharp, full of survival instinct. The crowd erupted. People were shouting, jumping, and clapping their hands together, as if they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A minute ago, no one knew who you were. A minute later, they looked at him as if he were one of a kind. But what about Redman? He didn't have time to be happy. The only thing he realized was that his legs were still shaking. He ran because for the first time in his life, he was accepted without anyone asking, "Where are you from?" Run. Because he knew that if he missed a beat or slipped a word, everything would disappear, and he would return to the very beginning, where there was no cheering, only the yellowed streetlights and the lingering shadows at the end of the block. Eric Sermon saw something that day. It wasn't boldness, it wasn't recklessness, but a very strange kind of fire. The fire of someone who had experienced too much to fear the spotlight anymore. A few weeks later, Redman, from an unknown DJ, was in EPMD's studio contributing vocals to Business as Usual. Fans today call it the beginning of a legend. But for Redman that year, it was a feeling like no other. He was seen, yes, but he also felt like he was freeloading in the world of those born to shine. In a glamorous industry where everyone speaks in the right tone, stands at the right angle, and performs in the right style, Redman always feels he carries the scent of Newark, the smell of a poor childhood of friends in prison of days, when he had to choose between living and disappearing. He stood in the recording studio like someone trying to balance between two worlds, one that wanted him to be an artist, and one that had once taught him that he was not allowed to be careless. So every time he holds the mic, he always feels like someone in the shadows is scrutinizing every word. The faces from Brick City never let him go. They stood with him on stage, like invisible judges. And perhaps for that reason, Redman raps with the energy that fans call beast mode. It's not because I like to show off. It's not because I want to prove anything to the industry. And that's because it's the only way he fights his own shadow. Audiences back then only saw a genius emerge from nowhere. But inside, he was a man struggling to keep himself from slipping back into the old darkness. That AZ moment was not a born-to-be moment at all. It was like a narrow escape. A narrow escape. An image so beautiful that people thought it was destiny. But in reality, it was the survival instinct of someone who had lost too much to lose anymore. Hip-hop exploded not just because his lyrics were insane. Hip-hop exploded because for the first time it saw someone step out of hell and still dare to stand tall under the lights and say, "I'm still alive, and I'll rap so no one forgets that." 5. First glory and first crack. Just when Redman thought he had finally escaped the shadow of his past. When What the Album propelled him to Rapper of the Year status and opened the first door to the glory every 90s rapper craved life, yanked him back to square one. For most artists, their first success is a promise of a bright future. But for Redman, a child who came from Brick City where every morning he woke up wondering which corner would see bloodshed that day, glory was just a thin wall temporarily masking the sound of the past silently chasing behind. People saw a crazy funny Redman spitting bars tirelessly, but few understood that he had never had the privilege of celebrating victory. For him, success is just a temporary moment of respite before life throws the next challenge in his face. In the very first year after the album, Redman was thrown headfirst into a confrontation that no one expected would be so serious. A sarcastic line in the intro of Funky Uncles, which seemed like just a bit of culture joking in the wild hip-hop scene, turned MC Hammer into the most dangerous opponent he'd ever faced. Hip-hop fans at the time often mocked Hammer for his clean pop rap style, his baggy pants, and his flashy dance moves. But those who laughed had no idea that Hammer was connected, and the connections here were real-world weighty ones. Redman, the rapper who had just reached the top of the Billboard charts, understood this faster than any rumor when he set foot in Oakland. The moment he recounted the incident always left listeners frozen. As soon as they got out of the car, he and his team were immediately forced into a dead end. Figures appeared at both ends of the street eyes that were not playful, with no sign of stage-style hip-hop beef. This is a situation that anyone who grew up on the streets will recognize immediately, either run or get surrounded. And the scariest part is Redman knows he's no longer on Newark territory, where he at least belonged to his home turf. This is Oakland Hammer's backyard, and if anything happens, no newspaper will call it an entertainment industry accident. It will simply be a payment. Fans today often say that Redman is not underrated, that he's the true GOAT in the eyes of those who understand hip-hop, but even those hardcore fans get choked up when they look back at the story in Oakland. A rapper who was just honored as Rapper of the Year should be flying from show to show, meeting the press, and enjoying their debut success. But Redman was different. He was standing in a city far from home, pushed into a defensive position, all because of a harmless line of dialogue. In that moment, all titles suddenly became meaningless. He was no longer a Def Jam representative, not a rising star, but had returned to his original role as the child who used to crawl under cars to avoid being beaten up all those years ago. The only difference is that this time, if you don't escape the consequences, will be much more severe. MC Hammer sought him out afterward, without any beating around the bush and without any rap beef, like dissing the opponent on stage. Hammer stood in front of Redman, looked him straight in the eye and said, "I won't let anyone touch my mother." A simple sentence, but it carried enough weight for Redman to understand that this was no longer about music, no longer about branding, no longer about image. This is the unwritten law of the streets. A law that even though you've stepped into the light, even though you've just achieved the greatest success of your life, you cannot escape. Redman said, "Yes, sir." It wasn't out of cowardly fear, but because he understood that in this world there are limits that should not be crossed. He understands that those born from the streets, even after becoming stars, still have to respect things not found in the curriculum of any record label. This is something that Redman's hardcore fans have always felt: quiet maturity. Redman doesn't boast, doesn't ramble, and doesn't turn the story into a marketing tool. He admitted his mistake, withdrew with respect, and moved on, gently, but with caution. This is what made the early hip-hop community view Redman as one of the most real people. The irony is that just as the world began to see Redman's talent, humor, and madness, It also saw the contradictions in his life wanting to escape the past, but the past never letting him go. Success doesn't make the streets drift away. It only makes you an easier target. He just entered the new millennium with a medal and a bit of mainstream buzz, but his emotional foundation is still the years he spent living in a neighborhood where murder was commonplace. And that's why he handles all problems with a very different attitude, calm, quick, and without dwelling on them. Outsiders see Redman as calm. Longtime fans see the wariness of someone who survived hell. This is the first crack in Redman's career. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a sales failure, but the truth that the stage lights weren't strong enough to push back the darkness of the past. Redman had reached the pinnacle, but that pinnacle opened up a new path where he had to accept that he would forever be a product of Newark no matter where he stood. And for those who love Redman for his authenticity, for the naked truth he brought to hip-hop culture, this is precisely why his story is painful, but beautiful in its own unique way. Because not everyone who is called a legend has had to run for their life. Redman does. And that's what creates a layer of tragedy that only those who truly understand him can recognize. 6. There Is a Darkside, an album born from a broken soul. No one knows that to create There Is a Darkside, Redman had to pull himself down to the bottom. He didn't start this album with inspiration, but with a long series of days immersed in chaos, fatigue, and highs so intense he couldn't even remember what he had done. Longtime fans often say half-jokingly, "Red was hella high during that album." But what they thought was fun was actually the trace of someone trapped in chaos that no one could reach. Hella high is not a meme. It's the simplest way to describe a mind that's falling apart piece by piece. At the time, he entered the studio for There Is a Darkside. Redman was not an artist riding high after his initial successes. He was a young man in his 20s pulled back by 100 different shadows. The past of Newark unhealed wounds, friends in prison, survival obsessions, addiction that began on sleepless nights, and the pressure to prove he belonged in hip-hop. It all hit him at once. In a later interview, Redman admitted frankly, "I wasn't okay. I take a lot of medication. I'm lost." That was a rare moment of honesty in the career of someone who always tried to hide the darkness with laughter. After What the Album, everyone thought Redman would go up, be clean neat, and continue his upward trajectory. But music isn't magic, and success doesn't make the past disappear. It just silences old wounds. And as he entered this phase, things that were thought to be buried resurfaced with even greater intensity. An artist needs tranquility to create an album. But Redman chose to lock himself away in a dark room, producing each beat himself and grappling with the overwhelming emotions. No team, no record label pressure, no studio, break, mix, loop. Only Redman, a dark room, and a mind trembling with stimulants. There were nights I couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling and felt like all of Newark was collapsing on my head. Days of imbalance, not knowing if I'm writing out of passion or to escape myself. When you listen back, you can feel the distortion of the mood samples that drag vocals that scream in your head and rap bars that sound like someone whispering a confession. Not happy, not bright, not pleasing to the ear. There Is a Darkside is not an album for those who enjoy easy listening music. It's the diary of a lost soul recorded with the rhythm of drums and tangled rap verses. Some hardcore fans called this album crazy, dirty, sinister, and it wasn't until years later that they understood why it had such energy. This isn't an album Redman intentionally made dark. This is Redman's album where he's living in the dark, and so it's so true that many listeners find it heavy. You might like Muddy Waters for its subtlety, What E for its humor, but There Is a Darkside has something no Redman album does: absolute rawness. Where does that nakedness come from? From the fact that you have nothing left to lose. From the days of going out with the crew, not knowing who would make it out, from the memories of seeing loved ones go to prison, from the sight of a mother crying because she couldn't keep her son on the right path, from the clashes that led to bloodshed. When he closed the studio door, those things spilled out with the music. It's not that I wanted to tell you, but because it's so deep, it can't be hidden anymore. In American hip-hop, many artists talk about darkness, but most of that darkness comes from the story being rewritten to fit the beat. Redman is different. Your shadows are not being processed through a filter. It's as original as the breath of someone who doesn't know if they'll be alive tomorrow. It's rough, it burns, it makes your chest feel tight. And that's why this album is respected by true fans, not because it's perfect, but because it's so brutally honest, it's hard to listen to. Despite this, the album's biggest tragedy lies in the fact that Redman himself doesn't like listening to it. He made it clear, "I can't go back to that time. I don't want to remember who I was back then." And when an artist doesn't want to listen to the work they created themselves, you understand how deeply hurt they are. This is the paradox of art. Sometimes the most beautiful things are born from pains that the artists themselves don't want to look back on. For Redman, "There is a dark side" is proof that he came too close to the edge and survived only because hip-hop pulled him back just in time. At the age of 55, looking back, one realizes if that period of life had been slightly different, there might not be a name like Redman to mention in hip-hop today. 7. Final light, pinnacle icon, and unfair oblivion. Redman once reached the heights that any rapper dreams of. But the bitterest thing is that the light didn't stay with him as long as it should have. It's like the feeling of standing before a sea of people, the lights shining directly into your eyes, the cheering shaking the entire stage floor. And then, after just one breath, everything goes dark. It's not because you're getting worse, but because there's a world behind it, deciding who gets to shine and who has to stay out of the picture. Many people remember Redman as a humorous guy who would tear up the studio always wearing a wide smile as if life had never hurt him. But for those who grew up with 90s hip-hop, those who used to lie on the couch, watch MTV all night and listen to cassettes crackle with every beat, Redman wasn't just the funny guy. He is the impulse of an era, a true monument, a person who the moment they step on stage, the atmosphere instantly changes. But there's always a harsh truth in an artist's life. The most genuine people are often the ones most avoided by the system. And that was Redman's tragedy at the age of 55. You didn't disappear at all. He only lives in a world that is becoming so fake that he can no longer recognize the true light. In the 90s, Muddy Waters was not just an excellent album, it's like a film reel that captures the DNA of hip-hop raw smoky, full of laughter, rebellion, and nameless pains. Redman stood amidst all of that with an energy that hardcore fans still say, "That's Redman in his purest form." That album proves that rap can be dirty, real deep, and fun all in one breath. When it comes to top MCs alongside Nas M Kiss, the name Redman always appears with a very unique respect. Many people say it straight. If Redman isn't in your top 5, you don't understand hip-hop. But alongside the peak of his career is the story that fans have debated for 2 decades: his friendship with Method Man. They were an inseparable pair, like two flames from the same spark. But this very compatibility raises a difficult question. Would Redman trade his solo career to step into the double spotlight? Meth has Wu-Tang behind him. Redman swam by himself. Some fans believe he would have become one of the greatest solo rappers if he hadn't split the spotlight with Meth. Some other fans said, without Red Meth, doesn't have that day's vibe. Truth, Redman has never blamed anyone. He chose friendship. But sometimes it's kindness itself that causes your name to be placed lower on the list of legends. Blackout brought them to the top. But the industry isn't standing still. Hip-hop transitioned to clubs, then trap, and then auto-tune. Rappers like Redman, who would spend hours just to write a decent verse, are considered outdated. It's not that they're not good, and because the market only favors what's easy to sell. Redman remained true to his funk doctor essence, refusing to bend to trends. And when you don't change, the system doesn't bother keeping you around either. Then MTV Cribs came on. A Cribs episode so real, it breaks all television standards. A small messy house, electrical wires for a doorbell, and a cousin sleeping on the floor. The audience burst into laughter, but Hollywood doesn't. They like glitz white lights, borrowed cars, and heavy makeup. Redman came face to face with the stark truth. And that truth ironically made Hollywood shy away from him. Even The Dirty with Christina Aguilera brought his name into the global mainstream that light only brushed past. Pop music isn't for people who are real. Pop is seasonal. And Redman, he belongs to culture, not the market. He became a cult figure, a legend among those who truly understand hip-hop, not a Hollywood superstar. How High became a classic. Def Jam games bring you into the memories of millions of gamers. But all of that only reinforces one truth. Redman is a legend for those who know not for everyone. And at 55, that's even clearer. Fanatics still call him the GOAT. Those who grew up with him still know every album, every joke, every fiery verse. But the mainstream almost doesn't remember his name anymore. No scandals, no TikTok, no drama. Just a 55-year-old man who runs every morning, goes to the studio every night, and lives simply just like he is. But for those who loved hip-hop from its rough and undisciplined beginnings, Redman never disappeared. He was still there like a lamp that didn't need a stage, a monument doesn't need media, a legend that doesn't need Hollywood's approval. And perhaps at the age of 55, that is the most beautiful light a rapper can leave behind.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now during on screen.